thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one.
As we begin our journey into God of War 4 and exploring the mythology and lore behind the game, I'd like to start with a character that we encounter very early on, a character who's first introduced to us as the Stranger. Now over the course of the video, we'll examine his true identity, his role in the game compared to his role in actual Norse mythology, and hopefully by the end we can discuss the differences and the reasons for them. We first encounter the Stranger during somewhat of a father-son bonded moment between Atreus and Kratos when there is a knock at the door. The Stranger is almost goading Kratos to come out and face him, claiming that he knows what Kratos really is. With Atreus unaware that his father is a god, and Kratos wanting to keep it that way, he goes to face the Stranger. After a series of questions and backhanded insults from the Stranger, the two finally come to blows, and we quickly find out that whoever this Stranger is, he possesses the power of a god. We are given a few hints during this first encounter as to who the Stranger could be. He mentions several times that he is incapable of feeling anything, even saying that he had hoped of all the people he faced, it would be Kratos that would finally make him feel something. We're given our biggest clue when he says he was sent by Odin and all he wanted was answers, implying that he could be one of the many sons of Odin. This confrontation eventually ends with the two on the floor in a bloody mess, and Kratos snapping the Stranger's neck, throwing him down a large crack in the ground. It doesn't take too long before we actually learn the true identity of the Stranger. When observing the discussion between the Stranger and Mimir, he confirms that he is a son of Odin, and his name is Baldur. After several more encounters, Kratos and Atreus learn the hard way that Baldur cannot be killed by any physical or magical source, essentially making him indestructible. Now that we know who the Stranger is in the game, we can compare and contrast these depictions to those of actual mythology. Baldur was the son of the god Odin and the goddess Frigg, but in the game his mother is Freya, and here's where it gets a tad confusing. Frigg and Freya in Norse and Germanic folklore are sometimes regarded as two separate entities, and other times they appear as the same person just with a different name. So I guess we can cut God of War some slack with that one, as the relationship between Frigg and Freya is fairly ambiguous even within mythology. So back to Baldur himself. In Norse mythology he was described as being loved by all of those around him. He was said to be so handsome and gracious that light would radiate from him. Not exactly what we see in the God of War version. One day Baldur began to dream about how he would die, and in his concerns he told his mother, who loved her son so dearly that she travelled the entire world, having everything swear an oath to never harm her son. With Baldur now invincible, the gods would often amuse themselves by throwing weapons and random objects at him, only to see them bounce off with the god completely unharmed. We do also see this in the game, but instead Baldur's mother with the use of magic makes it so he cannot be killed. However, there is quite a downside, as Baldur is left unable to feel anything, and the side effect of this spell does explain and help us understand Baldur's character. In Norse mythology he was gracious and cheerful, but in order to create a character who is the opposite of this and essentially a villain for the story, the downside of his mother's spell explains Baldur's behaviour and mental state, with him left angry and resentful towards her and his own existence. If we once again refer back to Norse mythology, Baldur does eventually die, and it's at the hands of Loki. Loki inquires if Frigg had missed anything in her quest to obtain an oath from everything in the world, to which she answers that she considered mistletoe to be too small and harmless to even ask for an oath. Loki, being the trickster that he was, then created a spear made from mistletoe and convinced the blind god Hoder to throw the spear, assuming that it would bounce straight back off Baldur. But when Hoder threw the spear, he threw it with such force that it pierced the god, instantly killing him. In the game itself, Baldur is not killed by a mistletoe spear, but when he punches Atreus, his hand is pierced by a mistletoe arrow tip, which was being used to hold Atreus' quiver together. The mistletoe alone does not kill Baldur, but he now claims to be able to feel pain, so we can assume that the mistletoe broke his mother's enchantment, leaving him vulnerable, and he would eventually be killed by Kratos. Now there's no denying that Baldur's depiction in God of War differs drastically to how he was seen in Norse mythology. He's almost shown as being the exact opposite in some cases, and some of you may not like that, but there is a reason and an explanation as to why it's done. When Baldur is first introduced to us, he comes across as this slightly unhinged and almost drunken brawler type. As the story progresses, so does our dislike for Baldur, as he assumes the role of the villain. But by the end of the story we begin to understand his issues with his interfering mother and the struggle of having to live 100 years without being able to feel anything. He becomes this corrupted figure, driven insane by what he perceives to be his mother's curse. I think it's fairly normal to feel a degree of sympathy towards Baldur, with his death being seen as almost a release from the life that he hated. There are a few nice touches and moments added throughout the game, that many people would have missed. The relationship between Balder and his overprotective mother is quite an accurate representation of Balder in Norse mythology. There are some accounts that come from the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus that describe Balder as a warlord, constantly eager to engage in battle, and that's something that we definitely see in the game, with his endless pursuit of Kratos and Atreus, and the sheer number of battles between them. For those of you who would have preferred to see Balder die at the hands of Loki, we find out at the end of the game that the name Atreus' mum actually gave him was in fact Loki, meaning they were able to remain somewhat true to the original story, with both Loki and Mistletoe playing a part in the death of Balder. For everyone who was sad to see Balder die, I wouldn't be too disheartened, because during Ragnarok, he does actually return to the land of the living, so there is a chance we see Balder make a return in a future God of War game. I hope you guys enjoyed this style of comparison and explanation video, and if you did, then feel free to share any ideas or suggestions with me in the comments below. But as always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.